A young black girl simply wanted to deposit money into her account, but instead of being served, she was met with suspicion, judgment, and humiliation right in front of everyone. The bank employee sneered, whispered, and decided that the girl wasn't worthy of that amount of money. They thought they had the right to judge. They were wrong, because they had just refused to serve the daughter of the bank's very own chairman, and in just a few minutes, they would pay the price for their discrimination. Meridian Financial Bank, where crowds of people pass through, everyone busy with their own financial transactions. 13-year-old Maya Freeman walked through the revolving door with excitement and pride in her heart. Today was not a normal day. Today, she was there to deposit her first amount of money into her own savings account, an important milestone for her, $5,000, a large sum for a child her age, gathered from prestigious math scholarships and birthday gifts from her parents and relatives. Maya wore a simple green hoodie, jeans, and her favorite sneakers, her hair neatly braided into 2 small braids. No designer bags, no sparkling jewelry, no signs of wealth. To anyone looking from the outside, she was just an ordinary black girl. No one could guess that her father was Frederick Freeman, the chairman of Meridian Financial Bank. Maya didn't want things to be easy just because of who she was. She wanted to experience the process of depositing money into her account, managing personal finances, just like anyone else. Above all, she wanted to make her father proud. The man who had always taught her that independence and financial responsibility were the most important foundations for success. Stepping into the grand lobby of the bank, Maya looked up at the high ceiling where crystal chandeliers sparkled, reflecting light. The polished marble floors mirrored the footsteps of customers. The bank employees in neat suits walked back and forth, holding documents or greeting luxury clients with professional smiles. No one noticed the 13-year-old girl standing in line with a thick envelope in hand. Maya wasn't bothered by this. She was focused on her task, depositing her savings, the first step toward becoming financially independent, just like her father had taught her. She smiled as she imagined the future. One day, she would use this money to invest in a startup idea, or maybe take a study trip abroad. The possibilities seemed endless, but Maya didn't know that this visit would change everything, not just for her, but for her father's entire bank. As Maya stood in line, her hand gently holding the envelope with the money, she observed the customers around her as the crowd slowly moved up to the counter. At first, she was just trying to kill time while waiting for her turn, but it didn't take long for her to realize something was off. The bank wasn't too crowded at this moment, but the way the employees served each customer was distinctly different. A middle-aged, white businessman in an expensive suit walked in and was immediately greeted by an employee. "Good afternoon, sir. Please come into the VIP room. We will assist you right away," the employee said respectfully, bowing slightly, and led him past the long line into a luxurious private room. No one in line protested. It seemed like this was a familiar routine. A few minutes later, an elderly Asian couple approached the counter. No one greeted them, no warm words like the businessman received. The teller simply pointed silently toward the waiting area, expressionless, as if they were a burden to be pushed out of the way as quickly as possible. The couple exchanged a brief, puzzled glance but said nothing, quietly heading to the seating area, waiting in silence. Next, a Spanish man in work clothes approached the counter holding a simple check. He wasn't asking for a large loan, nor was he conducting a complex transaction. He just wanted to cash a check, a process that should have been quick and simple. But instead of handling it promptly, the teller began to ask rapid-fire questions. Do you have ID? Where's your social security card? Do you have a work contract? These requests felt like a challenging exam specifically for him, while a white customer before him had cashed a check without such scrutiny. Maya felt something was wrong, an uneasy feeling creeping into her chest. She had attended financial events with her father, where people talked about fair service and the customer comes first. But what she was seeing now was a far cry from those idealistic theories. She looked down at her outfit: green hoodie, jeans, sneakers. Nothing special, nothing to stand out. And then she began to wonder, when it was her turn, how would she be treated? Maya took a deep breath, trying to keep a calm demeanor as she approached the counter. She had been waiting for nearly 40 minutes, a much longer wait than the white customers who came in after her and were served first. But she didn't complain, didn't frown or show any frustration. She simply stood tall, smiled, and placed the envelope on the counter. "I'd like to deposit money into my savings account," she said clearly, her eyes full of the confidence of a young girl taking her first steps on the journey to manage her own finances. But instead of receiving a warm smile, Beth, the young teller facing Maya, didn't smile at all. She stared at the envelope of money, her gaze slowly shifting to one of coldness and suspicion. "Where did this money come from?" Beth asked, her voice flat, with no trace of friendliness. Maya blinked. For a moment, she felt that this question was strange. Why ask about the source of the money? Hadn't she seen so many people come here to deposit money without being questioned like this? She had never seen anyone scrutinized like this just for wanting to save money. "It's from a math scholarship and birthday gifts," Maya responded earnestly, still smiling, though she felt something was off, an uneasy sensation creeping into her chest. Beth didn't respond immediately, but her eyes spoke volumes, a brief moment of doubt and wariness, as if Maya had said something too hard to believe. A black child could have $5,000 in cash to deposit. Beth looked at Maya as if the girl were lying. Without saying another word, Beth silently turned around, casting her eyes toward Mark, a senior teller sitting at the next desk. "Mark, come take a look at this," she called in a flat tone, but it was enough for Maya to realize she had just stepped into an entirely different situation. This was not a normal transaction, not the pleasant experience she had hoped for, but rather a covert interrogation. Mark lifted his eyes from the computer screen, his sharp blue gaze immediately locking onto Maya. He was in his early 30s with neatly trimmed brown hair, wearing a shiny watch that was likely worth as much as the money Maya wanted to deposit. His expression wasn't overtly rude, but it was full of disdain, as if he were someone who was confident he understood the world better than anyone else. Mark walked over, glanced at the envelope of money on the counter, then quickly scanned Maya from head to toe, as though evaluating every tiny detail about her. Simple clothes, neatly braided hair, a child's face, but intelligent eyes. "Young lady, this amount of money seems a bit much for you," he said, his voice stretching out with hidden meaning. Maya clenched her fist, but she didn't let her emotions take over. Why were they asking so much? This was her account, her money. Why was she being treated as if she had done something wrong? "I told you, it's scholarship money and birthday gifts," she repeated, this time with a more certain tone. Mark let out a light scoff, turned to Beth, and exchanged a look full of unspoken understanding. No one said anything, but Maya could feel they were assuming she was lying. Where would this little girl get $5,000 from? Maybe someone asked her to deposit it for them, Mark muttered quietly, but loud enough for Maya to hear. Her heart tightened in her chest. She had expected an exciting experience when she entered the bank, but instead she was being judged, suspected, treated like a criminal, all because of the color of her skin. And what happened next only made the situation worse. Maya tried to remain calm, but the frustration surged within her like waves crashing on the shore. She had been waiting for nearly 40 minutes. watching how other customers were served easily, quickly, and without interrogation. But now, when it was her turn, she was met with suspicious glances, questioned about the source of her own money, and treated like a suspect. Beth kept staring at her, her gaze colder than professional. When Maya explained that the money came from scholarships and birthday gifts, Beth's response was not a sympathetic smile or a nod of acceptance. It was a furrowed brow and a pointed look toward Mark. Mark, who had been standing nearby, stepped closer, sizing Maya up with a smug smile. He crossed his arms, tilted his head as if analyzing an incredibly difficult problem with no solution. Where did this girl get $5,000? Maybe someone asked her to deposit it for them, Mark said softly, but loud enough for Maya to hear clearly. His voice held no seriousness, only a sneer, as if the idea that a black girl could have such an amount of money was too ridiculous to believe. Maya felt a fiery heat rise in her chest. She had never been doubted in this way. At school, she was always an excellent student, with outstanding achievements in math, and the scholarship she received was no surprise to anyone who knew her. But Mark didn't know who she was, and he didn't care. Maya steadied her voice, trying not to let the insult she had just received weaken her resolve. "This is my money. I have an account here." She said it slowly, emphasizing each word as if to remind the people in front of her that she wasn't some stranger trying to make an unreasonable demand. But it was Mark's reaction that truly shocked her. He glanced quickly at Maya once more, then leaned in close to Beth, whispering something. Although he tried to keep it quiet, Maya still heard every word clearly. "It might be dirty money. Look at her. Someone's probably pulling the strings behind her." The words hit Maya like a slap to the face. She felt a surge of anger, not just because they doubted her, but because they didn't even bother to hide it. The words weren't just a careless assumption, but an open insult, a deep and dangerous prejudice about people like her. Maya clenched her hands, her nails digging into her palms, but she didn't let herself react immediately. She couldn't give them a reason to throw her out of here. She couldn't let them control her emotions. Taking a deep breath, she tried to keep her voice as calm as possible, even though her heart was raging like a storm inside. "I've already said it. This is my money," she repeated, this time emphasizing each word, her eyes fixed on Mark's face. But instead of hesitation or embarrassment, Mark seemed amused. He smirked, as if he had been waiting for this reaction from her. "Well then, there's no problem if we check your account, right?" This time, his voice no longer hid the disdain. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't believe things had gone this far. They didn't want to help her. They didn't want to process the transaction. They wanted to find a reason to refuse her. She had heard about stories like this before. Black people being denied services at banks simply because of prejudice, being treated as suspicious just because of their appearance or background. But Maya never thought she'd have to experience it herself in her father's very own bank. A bank that prided itself on serving all customers fairly. A bank with a slogan about transparency and responsibility. But right now, Maya didn't feel treated fairly, transparently, or responsibly. Beth tapped on the keyboard, her eyes scanning the computer screen, but deliberately looking at Maya with a probing gaze. "Do you have any documentation to prove it?" The question struck Maya like a knife to her pride. Documentation? Maya knew this wasn't the standard procedure. The customers before her hadn't been asked for any documents, hadn't been asked to present IDs or any other paperwork. But she was being put in a completely different situation just because she was a black girl. She looked directly at Beth, not blinking. "I have an account here. I've already provided the information." Her voice was unwavering, but instead of continuing with the transaction, Beth quickly glanced at Mark, then nodded slightly, as if they had silently agreed on something. Maya's stomach tightened. What were they doing? She knew they were stalling, trying to make things difficult for her, to make her feel unwelcome. Mark sneered, turning to Beth, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. We need to verify her account. Maybe we have a money laundering case here. This time, he wasn't whispering. He said it loud enough for everyone around to hear. Maya suddenly felt the eyes of other customers on her. Some people looked at her with curiosity, others with hesitation, while a middle-aged woman stared at her with a look full of doubt. Maya felt like she was nailed to the spot, scrutinized as if she had done something wrong, but she knew she hadn't. The problem wasn't with her. The problem was with them, and she wasn't going to let them make her afraid. The atmosphere in the bank grew tense, as if an invisible fog had settled over the entire space. The customers around them paused, some deliberately turning away, pretending not to notice what was happening. But there were also some glances of concern, as if they too sensed that something was wrong in the way the girl was being treated. Beth and Mark, who until now had tried to maintain control of the situation, exchanged looks and signaled another employee. Within seconds, a woman with an air of authority appeared from the management office and slowly made her way to the counter. She wasn't in a rush, nor did she seem like she was dealing with a customer in need of assistance. On the contrary, her deliberate, slow steps felt purposeful, as if she were a judge walking to the courtroom to pronounce a sentence on a criminal who had already been judged before the trial even began. Jessica Keller, branch manager of Meridian Financial. She was a middle-aged woman in her early 40s with neatly styled blonde hair and impeccable attire. Each step she took radiated confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from never having to humble herself before anyone. She had worked at this bank for more than 15 years, rising to the position of manager thanks to impressive numbers in reports and her ability to maintain order in her branch. But the order she maintained was not for all customers. She had heard Beth and Mark quickly summarize the situation, but instead of checking the system to verify the account or following proper protocol by asking Maya questions, Jessica immediately took several seconds to evaluate the girl from head to toe. That look was not just curiosity or a simple assessment. It was a judgment, a verdict, a categorization. And in Jessica's mind, Maya was immediately labeled a black child walking into the bank with more money than what she believed a child like her should have. She tilted her head slightly, offering a faint smile, a smile that contained no kindness whatsoever. "Sweetheart, this money isn't for you." Her voice was gentle, but it carried an unmistakable tone of disdain. It wasn't a question or a request for confirmation. It was a statement. Maya didn't blink, didn't flinch. She had seen that look before, from teachers who didn't believe a black student could be good at math to store employees who kept a close watch on her whenever she walked in, as if she could steal something at any moment. But this time, she wasn't going to ignore it. "Why not? This is my money," she said slowly, emphasizing each word, her eyes never leaving Jessica Keller's. She didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't back down. Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting a child to dare respond to her like that. But in just a moment, her feigned calmness returned. "Maybe you should go to one of those places that specializes in cash deposits." She leaned down slightly, her voice lowered, but still loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. "Places where people like you tend to go." Those words hit Maya like a slap across the vast lobby of the bank. "People like you." She had heard those words before, but never so blatantly thrown at her like this. She could see an elderly woman standing in line nearby hesitate, her eyes flickering with surprise. A middle-aged man quickly turned his gaze elsewhere, pretending not to hear anything. Another bank employee deliberately lowered their head to focus on their computer screen, as if they wanted nothing to do with this situation. No one said anything. No one protested, but Maya couldn't stay silent anymore. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from a rising anger swelling in her chest. "I just want to deposit money into my account," she said slowly, making sure to accentuate each word, her gaze never leaving Jessica Keller. She didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't yield. Jessica raised an eyebrow again, as if she couldn't believe this child dared to stand up to her like that. Mark and Beth exchanged looks, but neither of them spoke. Their silence was a clear confirmation. They agreed with Jessica. But the silence from some of the other customers wasn't quite the same. A white woman, standing a few meters away, instinctively pulled her son closer to her, as though Maya's presence had suddenly become dangerous. A man in a blue shirt glanced at the girl for a moment, then shook his head, as if he didn't want to get involved in whatever was going on. But then, an older man, possibly a postal worker, standing at the back of the line, crossed his arms over his chest and looked at Jessica with clear disapproval in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but his gaze said it all. Jessica didn't seem to notice any of that. She straightened her vest, grabbed another envelope from the counter and looked at Maya as if the girl were an inconvenience disrupting her work. "Sweetheart, you should leave. We have the right to refuse service if we find something suspicious." "Suspicious?" Maya repeated, her voice now sharper. "What am I doing that's suspicious? Why am I being treated differently from the others?" Jessica sneered, but this time she didn't hide her contempt. "If you continue arguing like this, I'll have no choice but to call security." Maya couldn't believe what she had just heard. Security? Because she wanted to deposit money into her own account. Were they really trying to make her out to be a troublemaker? Her hand instinctively clenched around her phone in her hoodie pocket. She felt it was time to do something. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, and dialed a number. Her voice remained calm, but this time there was no more tolerance in her eyes. "I'm calling my father." And as those words fell, the air in the bank shifted completely. The atmosphere in the bank seemed to freeze the moment Maya's words rang out. Frederick Freeman, the chairman of Meridian Financial Bank. That name hit Jessica, Mark, Beth, and everyone witnessing it like a jolt. A deadly silence fell over the room, as though the very air had been sucked out, leaving only the cold gaze of the young girl standing at the counter. Richard, the employee who had mocked Maya just moments before, suddenly froze. His face twitched slightly. The smug smile from seconds ago completely vanished, replaced by an evident look of confusion. Mark, who had been standing with his arms crossed in a condescending manner, also lost his earlier confidence. He glanced at Jessica, as though waiting for a reaction from his manager, but Jessica didn't speak immediately. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Then, after a few seconds to process the information, she let out a hollow, insincere laugh. "So, you're Mr. Freeman's daughter?" Jessica emphasized each word, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, I suppose he sent you here looking like this to test his bank, huh?" She crossed her arms over her chest, looking down at Maya as if still unable to believe what the girl had just said. To her, this was too absurd. An ordinary black child, dressed simply, walking into the bank with $5,000 in cash, suspected of fraud. Yet she turned out to be the daughter of the bank's chairman. If you really are his daughter, then prove it. Jessica tilted her head, her tone icy yet provoking. Call him right now. Let's see if he even picks up the phone. Maya didn't respond immediately. She calmly picked up the phone, dialed the number, and placed it to her ear. No hesitation. No doubt. Jessica's fingers twitched, as if she was beginning to feel something was wrong. The whole bank held its breath. A few customers exchanged glances, while others adjusted their stances, as if preparing to witness something unprecedented. The phone rang 3 times, then stopped. A voice came through the line. "Maya? Where are you?" It was Frederick Freeman's voice. Jessica stiffened, her hand instinctively gripping the counter, and her eyes, in that moment, became vacant. The surroundings suddenly seemed surreal. Mark and Beth stood frozen. Richard took a sharp breath, as though realizing the nightmare they had never anticipated had just begun. Maya remained calm, but now there was a sharpness to every word she spoke. "I'm at the main branch of your bank. They won't let me deposit money into my account, and now they're asking me to prove that I'm my father's daughter." A deathly silence enveloped the bank. Jessica felt a cold shiver down her spine. Sweat began to bead on her forehead. In her entire career, she had never experienced a moment like this. She had made a grave mistake. A very grave mistake. From the other end of the line, Frederick Freeman's voice became lower and more menacing than ever. "Maya, give the phone to the person in charge there." Maya didn't say anything further, only handed the phone toward Jessica. But Jessica didn't immediately take it. She stood still, frozen, as if her whole body had been turned to stone. She knew what was coming. She knew that her future at the bank might very well be over in this very moment. But refusing to take the call would be 100 times worse. Jessica swallowed, then slowly reached out and took the phone from Maya. She pressed the phone to her ear but didn't speak immediately. From the other end of the line, Frederick Freeman's voice was sharp as a knife. "Miss Keller, I'm giving you exactly 3 minutes to explain what's going on." Jessica felt dizzy, but she knew she couldn't lie. She couldn't hide it. She couldn't deny it. She had been cornered. The whole bank held its breath, watching as the nightmare Jessica Keller never saw coming slowly swallowed her whole. The space in the boardroom on the top floor of Meridian Financial's headquarters had always been reserved for important meetings, where the financial figures determining the fate of the entire corporation were meticulously analyzed. But today, no one in that room cared about revenue or quarterly reports. An unprecedented tension filled the air. Frederick Freeman stood in the middle of the boardroom, his eyes darkened, lips tightly pressed together in a straight line. The room was eerily silent, with the board members sitting rigidly, their eyes fixed on the live feed from the security cameras showing the scene unfolding at their main branch. On the screen, the 13-year-old girl with unwavering, determined eyes was facing branch manager Jessica Keller, a woman trying to maintain her confidence, though her hands were already trembling. Meanwhile, employees like Mark, Richard, and Beth stood frozen, pale-faced. They had heard the entire call. They had heard every word Maya said to her father, every subtle accusation thrown at the young girl by the bank staff, every suspicious look she had to endure simply for daring to enter the bank with her own legitimate money. And now they knew they had witnessed a terrible mistake. It wasn't just a mistake in customer service. It wasn't a small error in transaction procedures. It was a public humiliation of the daughter of the most powerful man in this bank. And more importantly, a public humiliation of the very values this bank claimed to uphold. "We're going there now." Frederick Freeman's voice was low but sharp as steel. no one dared to oppose. No one hesitated. A minute later, the entire board of Meridian Financial entered the special elevator for senior executives, heading straight to the parking lot where the drivers were already waiting. Never in the history of the bank had the most powerful figures rushed directly to a branch due to a transaction issue. But this time, everything had escalated far beyond a simple transaction. This time, it had become an ethical crisis, a clear example of the injustice embedded within their own system. And the first person to realize the terrible truth was Frederick Freeman. As Frederick Freeman's convoy sped toward the main branch, in the security observation room at headquarters, a team of technicians continued analyzing all the footage from the surveillance cameras. One of them, a young man with curly hair wearing a gray suit, shuddered as he discovered something even more horrifying than what they had seen on the main screen. "We have a bigger problem," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not just Maya. They've done this to many people." The head of security spun around. "What are you talking about?" The technician shakily scrolled on the screen, pulling up footage from earlier that day. The scenes were clear. A white businessman in a suit walked into the bank. Immediately greeted, no need to wait in line, no need to show any paperwork. An elderly Asian couple coldly pointed to the waiting area with no friendly greetings. A Spanish man in work clothes, interrogated about his paperwork, looked at with suspicion when all he wanted was to cash a small check. A middle-aged black woman stood waiting for nearly 40 minutes without anyone noticing, while the white customers who arrived after her were served first. And then Maya, a 13-year-old girl, denied service, mocked, and humiliated right in front of dozens of other customers. "Shit," one of the directors whispered, his face pale. "This is not an isolated incident," the head of security said, his voice cold. "This is a systematic pattern of discrimination." And it was all clearly recorded by the bank's own security cameras. Back at the main branch of Meridian Financial, Jessica Keller stood frozen, her hand tightly gripping the phone, unable to speak a word. Mark and Beth exchanged glances, their faces as white as paper. Richard could only swallow nervously, his legs feeling as if they might give way beneath him. Because now they knew what was about to happen. They had made a colossal mistake. They hadn't just humiliated a 13-year-old girl. They had humiliated the daughter of the most powerful man in the bank. And worse, they had been caught red-handed on the security system, with no way to deny it. The tension in the air was so thick that everyone in the bank could hear their own heartbeat. A security guard near the entrance unconsciously looked toward the street, as if he could feel a storm approaching. And just a few minutes later, the storm truly arrived. The bank's doors suddenly swung open, and the sound of authoritative footsteps echoed throughout the lobby. Frederick Freeman stepped in. Right behind him, Diane Porter, the bank's chief operating officer, and 3 senior board members followed, their expressions as sharp as blades. Those present in the bank instinctively stepped back, none daring to utter a word. Jessica Keller took a deep breath, trying to hold on to whatever last bit of power she had left, but at this moment she knew full well that she no longer held any power. She was left with a glaring truth, a nightmare from which no one could save her. The bank door swung open, the wind rushing in with an air of cold authority. A wave of silence swept through the entire lobby, as if everyone had just witnessed the arrival of an unstoppable force. Frederick Freeman stepped in first, tall and steady in his stride. His eyes were full of fury, unable to hide the boiling anger within him. Right behind him, Diane Porter, the bank's chief operating officer, walked with purposeful steps, her face as cold and sharp as a blade. The entire bank seemed to be drained of air. No one spoke. No one moved. All eyes were focused on the most important figures in the bank, people who had never appeared in a regular branch like this one. Jessica Keller turned pale. Her entire body seemed to stiffen, her hands instinctively clenching into fists, her breath becoming heavy. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. In her 15 years as a manager, she had never faced a situation like this. Never had her superiors shown up so suddenly like this, and never had the bank's chairman walked into a branch with such uncontrolled fury. Jessica's lips trembled, her throat dry. She tried to stammer out an excuse, but her voice was nothing more than a weak whisper. "Mr. Freeman, I didn't know. But Jessica couldn't finish her sentence because Frederick Freeman's voice cut through like a razor-sharp blade. "You didn't know?" His eyes locked onto Jessica's, sharp enough to pierce through any defense she might have tried to offer. "You just insulted my daughter right here in my bank." Each word hit like a hammer, making Jessica feel like her knees would give out beneath her. She had never seen Frederick Freeman this angry. In all the meetings she had attended with him, he was always calm, composed, and sharp, an individual who never let emotions cloud his decisions. But now, standing right in front of her, there was no restraint left. He was no longer the powerful CFO, the successful businessman. Now, Frederick Freeman was simply a father, filled with rage, defending his daughter from blatant injustice. Maya stood right next to her father, her gaze fearless, unflinching. She didn't need to say anything more. What needed to be said, she had already said. What needed to be proven, she had already proven. She didn't need to do anything more, because the guilty ones had already dug their own graves. Mark and Richard stood frozen, sweat dripping from their foreheads, their eyes shifting nervously back and forth. Beth, who had initially shown discomfort when rejecting Maya's transaction, was now trembling. She wasn't the mastermind, but she had stayed silent, done nothing to stop the injustice, and that made her part of the problem. Jessica Keller swallowed hard, trying to regain some confidence, but her voice was hoarse, no longer commanding. "Mr. Freeman, this is just a misunderstanding. We were just following security protocols to ensure that—" "Security?" Frederick scoffed, but there was no humor in it. "What kind of security is this? You secure things by insulting a child? By openly discriminating right in front of all these customers? By dismissing a customer just because she doesn't dress like a wealthy person?" Jessica couldn't say anything, because every word he spoke was an undeniable truth. It had all been recorded. It had all been witnessed. And worst of all, it had all been caught in the act by the bank's chairman himself. Diane Porter stepped forward, holding a tablet. On the screen were surveillance videos from earlier that day. Everything had been recorded. A white businessman walked in, greeted immediately. A Spanish man in work clothes, interrogated like a criminal just for trying to cash a small check. An elderly Asian couple, ignored completely, and Maya Freeman, the daughter of the most powerful man in the bank, treated like a suspect just for wanting to deposit money into her own account. No one in this branch could deny the truth anymore. Jessica clenched her lips, trying to regain some composure, but she had already seen what was on the screen. She knew the game was over. She had lost. Frederick took a deep breath, trying to control his anger, then looked straight at Jessica Keller. "You're fired." 3 simple words, but they struck at Jessica's career like a blade. Every muscle in her face twitched, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. "Mr. Freeman, please reconsider." "There's nothing to reconsider." Frederick cut her off, his voice cold as ice. "You don't deserve to manage this branch, or any other branch in my bank system." Jessica opened her mouth to say more, but Frederick Freeman's gaze stopped her dead in her tracks. He turned to Mark and Richard, the two who had directly insulted Maya. "You're both fired immediately." Mark turned pale. Richard opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. "Pack up your things and leave right now." Jessica had no strength left to resist. She lowered her head and took a step back, knowing this was the end of her career. No one begged for mercy. No one made excuses. There was no chance left to make things right. Only the deafening silence remained as everyone watched the consequences they so rightfully deserved unfold before them. Diane Porter remained unfazed, her fingers gliding over her tablet screen, selecting the most crucial video clips from the bank's surveillance system. The screen played undeniable footage. A white businessman walks in, skipping the line, greeted with a smile and a polite handshake. A Spanish man in work clothes is asked to show 2 forms of ID to cash a low-value check. An elderly Asian couple is ignored, treated rudely with a pointed gesture toward the waiting area. And then, Maya Freeman, a 13-year-old girl, is treated like a criminal simply because she didn't wear the attire of a wealthy customer they expected. Diane didn't say another word. She didn't need to. Everything had been recorded. Everything had been witnessed. There was no turning back for those responsible for this discrimination. Jessica Keller stood frozen, her face twisted in horror. Her entire career had crumbled in less than an hour. She took a deep breath, trying to hold on to whatever dignity she had left, but the looks from everyone in the bank had changed completely. Gone were the admiring gazes from employees. Gone was the respect from customers. Only cold judgment remained. She could feel it. Feel how everyone was looking at her as a failure. She wanted to say something, to justify herself, to find a reason to salvage the situation, but there was no excuse for what had just happened. Mark and Richard weren't faring any better. Mark tried to stay calm, but his eyes darted back and forth, his hands clenched together as if he were desperately searching for an escape route. Richard took a deep breath, glancing at Diane with pleading eyes, but all he received was a look of disdain from the manager. Both knew there was no more defense, and they knew it. In a corner of the counter, Beth trembled, too afraid to look up at anyone. She hadn't directly insulted Maya, wasn't the one who made the decision, wasn't the one who had pushed the girl into this terrible situation. But she had done nothing to stop it, and that made her a part of the problem. Diane walked up to Beth, her gaze sharp, yet not entirely indifferent. "Why didn't you speak up?" It was a simple question, but it cut straight to Beth's conscience. She swallowed hard, feeling her heart tighten, trying to come up with a reasonable answer. But there was nothing that could justify her silence. I didn't know what to do," Beth admitted, her voice almost choking. "Didn't know what to do?" Diane repeated, her tone bitter with sarcasm. "What if it were you? What if you were the one denied service just because of your appearance? Would you accept silence?" Beth bit her lip, her eyes welling with tears, but she didn't cry. She knew she had no right to cry right now. Diane stared at her for a few seconds, then finally made her decision. "Beth, you won't be fired, but you will be under probation for 3 months." Beth looked up, stunned. I get to stay?" "You'll stay only if you speak out against injustice," Diane stated firmly. "You can start fresh, but this is your last chance." Beth nodded immediately, feeling her heart loosen after being tight for so long. She knew she was much luckier than Jessica, Mark, and Richard, and she would never make that mistake again. Security guards appeared. their looks full of contempt for those who had just been fired. Jessica Keller, Mark Reynolds, Richard Carter, pack your things and leave the bank immediately. Jessica pursed her lips, but she knew she had no choice. No one was going to save her. No one was standing by her side. Everything she had built, her 15-year career, the power of being a branch manager, the respect of her subordinates, all of it was gone in this one morning. Mark and Richard walked behind her, not a word spoken, not an attempt to resist. They had no choice but to leave in humiliation. And the moment the bank door closed behind them, a heavy burden was finally lifted. Frederick Freeman stood there, his gaze no longer angry but deeply reflective. He turned to Diane, then looked at Maya. The young girl stood tall, unafraid, unwavering. Frederick was prouder of his daughter than ever before. He took a deep breath and then spoke clearly, so all the bank employees could hear. From today on, no one in this bank system is allowed to discriminate against any customer. No one. Diane nodded in agreement, then walked over to the counter where Beth was still standing, awaiting her fate. Beth, from now on, you will be responsible for reporting any misconduct at this branch. You've seen the problems within our system. Now, it's time for you to do something to change it. Beth's heart leapt, and she nodded vigorously. Maya smiled, but it wasn't a victorious smile. This wasn't a battle for winning, but a fight to restore fairness. And the young girl knew this was just the beginning. Frederick Freeman stood in the center of the bank's lobby, in a silence full of authority, his gaze sweeping across the remaining employees. After what had happened, he no longer trusted the system he had built over the years. Meridian Financial Bank had always prided itself on customer service, fairness, and the values it brought to all layers of society. But what had happened today proved a disappointing truth. There were gaps in the system, and some people had gone against the core principles the bank was built on. And now, everything had to change. He was not just here to fire the wrongdoers. He was here to do something more important, to rebuild the entire system from the ground up. Frederick took a deep breath, his eyes resolute as he looked at all the employees standing silently in the lobby. Not only the tellers, but also the higher-ups, those who had once been confident that they understood how the bank operated, that they had been doing their jobs well. But today, they had to face the truth. Starting today, he spoke, not loudly, but with a voice that echoed throughout the lobby. Meridian Financial will undergo a complete restructuring. No one dared to take a breath. There will be no room for anyone who behaves unprofessionally, unethically, or looks down on customers based on their appearance. If anyone in this system feels they cannot follow the values we will implement, they may submit their resignation right now. No one moved, no one dared to speak against him, because they knew he meant it. Starting today, Frederick continued, we will implement a stricter system of customer service monitoring than ever before. Every branch, every employee, every transaction will be tracked and evaluated. If any customer feels they have been discriminated against, they will have the right to report directly to the board, and that feedback will be investigated to the fullest. Diane Porter nodded and stepped forward, continuing the president's message. All employees within the bank system will be required to participate in mandatory training programs on anti-discrimination and fair customer service, she declared. Those who do not meet the standards after this training will no longer hold positions in the bank. The tension filled the room. Some employees exchanged glances, realizing that Meridian Financial was about to enter a completely new era, one that would not tolerate injustice. Right after Frederick Freeman's groundbreaking statement, senior management teams immediately began implementing restructuring measures, installing customer service monitoring systems. Every transaction at the counter will be recorded and analyzed to detect any signs of bias. All customer feedback will be collected seriously and handled promptly. Comprehensive anti-discrimination training program. All employees, from the lowest to the highest ranks, will undergo training on fairness and customer service. Mandatory tests will be administered to assess each employee's understanding and application of the training. Changing employee evaluation systems. Evaluation criteria will not only be based on business performance but also on how employees treat customers. Employees with multiple negative feedback from customers will be warned, demoted, or fired. Establishing a financial fairness oversight department. A dedicated team will inspect all branches to ensure that every transaction is carried out transparently without discrimination. Data on service denial rates based on demographics will be closely monitored to detect and address any signs of injustice immediately. Hotline for direct complaints to leadership. Every customer will be able to contact a special hotline where executives will personally receive complaints about injustice and discrimination. No more cover-ups, no more hiding behind the system. Beth stood quietly, feeling both anxious and relieved. She knew she had been given a second chance, and she would never make the same mistake again. Other employees who weren't fired couldn't hide their shock. They had witnessed the wrongdoers being punished right before their eyes. They understood that Meridian Financial would no longer operate the way it had before. Everything had changed. Maya stood next to her father, her eyes showing no arrogance or smugness. She didn't need a personal victory. She only needed real change. Frederick looked at his daughter, then placed his hand on her shoulder. "You did very well, Maya." She looked up at her father and smiled. She didn't need to say anything else because she knew what she had just done didn't just change her life. It changed an entire system. A system that had once been unjust to people like her. A system that now had to change forever. The tense atmosphere at Meridian Financial Bank gradually settled after Frederick Freeman's swift overhaul. But the aftershocks of the event did not stop within the bank's walls. It spread far beyond. When Maya Freeman left the bank that day, she had no idea that within just a few days, her name would appear in news headlines, on the front pages of newspapers, and in heated debates on social media. She had only wanted a fair transaction, but now she had become a symbol of the most significant financial reform in the history of this bank. At first, what happened inside the bank was only circulating internally. But within a day, the news began to leak out. The customers present at the bank that day had witnessed everything, and some had recorded the entire incident. A video showing Jessica Keller, Mark, and Richard being fired on the spot, along with Frederick Freeman's powerful voice announcing a comprehensive overhaul, quickly appeared online. Shocking headlines started to appear on major news outlets. Bank chairman's daughter denied transaction just because of her appearance. Meridian Financial fires managers for discrimination. 13-year-old girl exposes injustice in the financial industry. A wave of articles analyzing the incident appeared, focusing not only on Maya, but also delving into larger issues of discrimination within the banking industry. Interviews with customers who had experienced unfair treatment flooded media platforms. Stories that had been buried were brought to light, and Maya Freeman became a symbol of change. What happened at Meridian Financial didn't just affect the bank internally. It created a ripple effect, forcing the entire banking industry to reassess the way they operated. Meridian Financial had no choice but to become a pioneer in reform. If they didn't, the scandal would forever stain their reputation. So, Frederick Freeman and Diane Porter quickly implemented more sweeping changes than ever before. Fair Customer Rating System. Every transaction would be recorded and analyzed to detect any signs of bias. An AI system would monitor loan decisions, account openings, and transaction processing to ensure no discrimination based on race, gender, or social status. Employee training reforms. All employees would be required to attend training sessions on anti-discrimination and fair customer service. Those who failed to meet standards after evaluations would be removed from the system. Direct Customer Feedback System. A hotline and anonymous feedback box would be set up so customers could report any perceived unfair treatment immediately. Clear Reward Punishment System. Employees who engaged in discriminatory behavior would be punished immediately. Employees who excelled in customer service would be rewarded. These changes not only shook the financial industry, but also received strong reactions from the public. Those who had once been victims of injustice in the banking sector voiced their strong support. They shared their stories, creating a wave of calls for transparency and fairness in financial institutions. But there were also opposing voices. Some other bank managers spoke out against the immediate firing of employees who violated the rules, fearing it could set a dangerous precedent. Some shareholders were concerned that such drastic reforms could impact short-term profits. But Frederick Freeman didn't back down. "My bank is not built on discrimination," he declared in a press conference. "If anyone thinks profits are more important than honor and fairness, they can withdraw their shares right now." That statement spread like wildfire, becoming one of the most powerful declarations by a CEO in the financial industry. Although Maya had never wanted to be the center of media attention, her story had become a symbol. Nonprofits focusing on financial equality began inviting her to participate in customer rights events. Many schools incorporated her story into their social justice curriculum. Some teachers even used Maya's lesson to help students understand injustice and how to stand up against it. But for Maya, none of that mattered as much as the fact that she had sparked real change. One morning, when she returned to the bank branch with her father to check on the progress of the reforms, she witnessed an elderly black man walk up to the counter. A young employee, not Beth, not Mark, not Richard, but a completely new face, smiled warmly at him and asked, "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" No hesitation, no skeptical look, only professional and fair service, exactly how the bank should have operated from the beginning. Maya looked at her father and smiled softly. She didn't need fame nor attention from the media. She just needed to see real change, and today she saw it begin. That morning, the headquarters of Meridian Financial was more bustling than ever. The camera lights flashed, reporters jostled to find the best positions, and executives stood waiting, their tension palpable. Today was going to be a historic day. In the center of the large auditorium, a formal podium had been set up, with a large sign behind it reading a simple yet powerful statement. All customers deserve to be treated with respect and served fairly. This statement was no longer just an empty slogan. It had become an unbreakable commitment, deeply embedded in the DNA of the entire banking system. Frederick Freeman and Maya walked up to the stage. He was no longer just a bank chairman. He was a father, a leader, and a true agent of change. Maya, standing tall, stood beside him. She was no longer just a child who had been denied service. Now, she was a symbol of reform, the one who forced a giant financial system to take a long, hard look at itself. Frederick stepped up to the podium, his gaze resolute. He didn't need a long speech. He wasn't there to placate public opinion. He was there to announce real change. "A month ago," he began, his voice resonating through the room, "my 13-year-old daughter was denied service by my own bank simply because she didn't have the appearance that some of the employees thought was worthy of the money she was depositing." A deadly silence enveloped the room. The executives froze. Reporters listened intently, some recording, knowing that what they were about to hear would shake the entire financial industry. Frederick continued, his voice growing stronger. "What happened to Maya is not an isolated incident. It is a sign of a deeper issue, an issue that the entire banking industry has intentionally ignored for years. Today, I stand here to announce Meridian Financial will no longer be part of this problem. We will be part of the solution." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in for everyone present. Then he looked directly into the camera lens, as if speaking directly to the millions watching. "From today, we are implementing new policies to ensure that no customer will be discriminated against because of their appearance, background, or social status." He turned to Diane Porter, who was holding a tablet with a prepared list of policies. Diane nodded and firmly declared, "Implementing a fair transaction monitoring system. Every transaction will be analyzed based on objective data, completely removing any bias from the employees handling the transactions. 2. Mandatory fair customer service training. All bank employees must undergo strict training on how to serve customers without allowing personal biases to interfere. Anyone who fails the post-training assessment will be removed from the system. 3. Establishing a Financial Fairness Council. This council, made up of customers from various social backgrounds, will be responsible for evaluating policies and reporting any injustices in service. 4. Publicizing a customer complaint hotline. Any customer who feels they've been discriminated against can directly file a complaint with the management. 5. Changing the employee reward punishment structure. Employees who receive positive feedback for fair service will be rewarded. Employees reported for discrimination will be investigated and disciplined immediately. Once Diane finished announcing the reform policies, all eyes turned to Maya. The young girl stepped up, took a deep breath, and looked directly at the crowd in front of her. No longer was Maya the shy, shocked girl who had experienced injustice. Now she was the one who had created change. "When I walked into that bank that day, I just thought I'd be making a regular deposit like anyone else," Maya said, her voice calm but powerful. "But I was judged, doubted, treated as suspicious, simply because they didn't think a black child could legally have that amount of money." A heavy silence filled the room. "But today everything has changed," Maya continued, "because we will no longer accept this." She turned to point at the large sign behind her. "All customers deserve to be treated with respect and served fairly." "This is not just a slogan," she said firmly. "This is a promise." Frederick Freeman's and Maya's speeches immediately sparked a wave of strong reactions. Other financial institutions began feeling the pressure to change their customer service policies. The media praised Meridian Financial for its courage in facing its mistakes and implementing reforms. Millions of customers expressed renewed trust in the bank. But most importantly, Maya's story became a lesson for an entire generation. She didn't just stand up for herself. She changed an entire system. And today, the world witnessed it. Although the whole world had witnessed the change that Meridian Financial Bank claimed, Maya still wasn't fully convinced. She knew that bold statements on stage didn't necessarily mean real change had occurred. True change wasn't in speeches. True change was in how an ordinary customer was treated when they walked into the bank without anyone knowing who they were. So, one morning, Maya returned to the main branch of Meridian Financial. But this time her father wasn't by her side. There were no cameras, no flashbulbs, no headlines. She wore a gray baseball cap, an old hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. No signs that she was the daughter of the bank's chairman. She was simply an ordinary customer. And this time, she wanted to see if the bank had really changed. Maya pushed the door open and immediately recalled the moment she had been denied service the last time. Just a few weeks ago, she had stood right there, treated like a suspicious person, questioned about her money, ridiculed, humiliated. Now, had the bank truly become a more fair place? She slowly walked toward the counter, maintaining a calm demeanor, but carefully observing everything around her. At the reception desk, a new employee greeted customers with a professional smile. No more indifference or discrimination like last time. A Spanish man in work uniform entered, and this time he was warmly welcomed, not bombarded with unnecessary questions like before. Maya squinted. This was a good sign, but she needed to see more. Maya approached the counter and realized that Beth was still working there. Beth hadn't been fired, but she was now under strict supervision after the earlier incident. Had she really changed? Beth looked up and caught Maya's gaze. For a moment she paused, as if recognizing the girl immediately. But this time, there was no awkwardness or tension in Beth's demeanor. Instead, she smiled. "Hello. What can I help you with today?" Beth asked, her voice genuinely friendly, with no hint of forced politeness. Maya placed a check on the counter, a check for $10,000. A large enough sum to test the new system. Maya stared at Beth, trying to find any sign of hesitation, perhaps a quick glance at her colleague for instructions or a moment of uncertainty in her actions. But there was nothing. Beth quickly checked Maya's account and moments later nodded. "Everything looks good. Would you like to withdraw some cash or transfer the funds?" Maya stared at Beth for another second. No suspicion. No ridiculous questions about the source of the money. No discriminatory glances. Just a regular banking transaction like any other customer. Maya smiled softly and said, "I'd like to deposit all of it into my savings account." Beth nodded, completing the transaction in less than 2 minutes. Not a second wasted on interrogation or judgment. Just fair and professional banking service, exactly as they had promised. As Maya left the counter, she looked back one more time. She saw an elderly black man, who before might have been left waiting in line for 40 minutes, now being served with care by an employee. She saw an Asian woman opening an account without being asked for unnecessary paperwork. She saw a single Latin father with his young daughter walk in, and they were greeted immediately, with no hint of suspicion. Maya sensed that something had truly changed, not just in the policies on paper, not just in media statements, but in the people, in how they treated each other. When Maya walked out of the bank, a cool breeze gently blew through, carrying with it a sense of relief she had never felt before. She didn't need the media to know that change had happened. She didn't need public attention to know that what she had fought for was right, because today she had witnessed it firsthand. Meridian Financial Bank had finally become a place where everyone, regardless of skin color, social class, or status, could walk in and receive fair service. Maya took a deep breath, smiled, and walked away. This time, she left the bank not with anger, but with a true belief that in some way she had changed the world. The sky today is clearer than usual. The sunlight shines down on the path that Maya walks, reflecting through the windows of the financial skyscrapers, where numbers and transactions determine the fate of the economy. The 13-year-old girl walks with a different mindset than the first time she entered Meridian Financial Bank. Today, she is no longer a customer who was doubted, insulted, and judged just because of her appearance. Today, she is a symbol of change. But Maya knows that this journey is not truly over, because injustice does not only exist in one single bank, because there are still countless people out there who are denied opportunities, pushed aside, just because of other people's prejudices. And she is ready to continue that journey. Just weeks after the reforms at Meridian Financial were announced, the entire financial industry began to feel the pressure to change. Other banks could no longer ignore what was happening. A number of large financial institutions started reviewing their policies. Some conducted secret internal audits to avoid a similar scandal, while others proactively launched financial fairness training programs. But not everyone was ready to accept change. Some CEOs of major banks criticized Frederick Freeman, saying that Meridian Financial had set a dangerous precedent and that excessive control would slow down the business process. Financial interest groups tried to oppose the imposition of fairness standards, claiming that it would remove flexibility in business decision-making. But the pressure from public opinion was too great. Articles, discussions on social media, and stories from customers who had been discriminated against continued to spread. The public no longer accepted silence from the other banks. They wanted to know, are financial institutions really fair to everyone? Can a person of color, an immigrant, a labor worker receive the same service as a wealthy businessman? Are the promises of change truly being kept, or are they just a tactic to soothe public opinion? And Maya knew that this was the most crucial moment. If she stopped now, everything would just be a moment in history eventually forgotten. But if she continued forward, she could create a real revolution. A few days after returning to the bank, Maya received an unexpected call. The caller was Diane Porter. "Maya, I have an offer for you." Maya was surprised but immediately focused on listening. Meridian Financial can't do this alone. If we really want to change the financial industry, we need a stronger voice, Diane said. We need someone who can speak the truth, someone who can represent the forgotten customers. Maya held her breath. "Would you like to join the Financial Fairness Council?" A moment of silence passed. Maya knew that if she nodded, it would mean stepping into a completely new path. No longer just a girl denied service by the bank. No longer just the daughter of a bank chairman, but someone standing up for justice. And she was no longer afraid. Maya smiled, gripping the phone tightly, and spoke firmly. "I'm ready." Months later, a special event was held at the Meridian Financial headquarters. On the stage, a row of seats was arranged for important speakers, financial activists, executives, and customers who had once been treated unfairly by the banking system. In the center of the stage, a special seat was reserved for Maya Freeman. The 13-year-old girl, once denied a transaction just because of her skin color, was now one of the faces representing change in the financial system. As she stepped onto the stage, camera flashes lit up everywhere. Maya took a deep breath, looked out at the hundreds of people before her, and said, "We've changed one bank. Now we're going to change an entire system." The applause rang out, not just for what she had done, but for what she would continue to do in the future. Because the fight for fairness never ends in one day, it has only just begun. Maya Freeman's story is not just about a 13-year-old girl being denied service by a bank. It is a wake-up call about injustice in the financial system, and how one person's courage to stand up can bring real change. From a small customer who was discriminated against, Maya became the driving force behind a historic reform. But the battle for fairness in the financial industry and society is far from over. What do you think about Maya's story? Can one person truly change an entire system? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring stories. Let's create change together.